OK, it's time now to take a look at what's been grabbing headlines here in France. I'm joined on set by Florence Villeminot. Good morning to you, Florence.
Good morning, Thomas.
Lots of focus on French police officers who are set to walk out in protest today.
That's right. For over the past 2 months, there have been some pretty fierce fighting between police officers and anti-government demonstrators, these demonstrators who are against the government's plan to reform the labor code. It's very rare for police officers to demonstrate here in France. In fact, this will be the third time they've staged a demonstration in the past 15 years. What are they angry about? Well, you can see it here on the front page of Le Figaro. They're angry about these violent protesters that they've been having to deal with for the past 2 months. They're tired of being targeted by what are known as casseurs, essentially groups of people that take advantage of these kind of protests to essentially wreak havoc and fight with the police. And if you take a closer look inside Le Figaro, they say what they're tired of is this feeling that there's a growing anti-police hatred that's kind of spreading across the country.
Well, Le Figaro lends its support to those protesting police officers as a kind of excuse to lash out against the government.
That's right. Le Figaro clearly sides with the police on this issue. In its editorial, it says that essentially police officers are facing violent protesters who are out to get them. These police officers are waiting for clear orders from the government, but they're not getting them. The government seems completely overwhelmed. And in fact, some police officers wonder if the government is letting this protest movement get out of hand to discredit the protesters themselves. You can see the title of this editorial. It's time to reestablish order. Le Figaro is nostalgic of a time that wasn't so long ago when the police were actually applauded by public opinion, quite literally in the street, quite literally at the Place de la République, where they're going to be staging this protest. This was, of course, in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks last January. Le Figaro says the Charlie spirit that we saw at in the wake of those attacks, that Charlie spirit doesn't seem to have lasted very long.
And the police say that everything has changed since those attacks in January and in November.
That's right. Le Figaro once again interviews a man named Frédéric Penchonard. He's the general director of the National Police. He's the former general director of the National Police. Currently, he's the general director of the opposition Les Républicains party. Must be said, he's very close to Nicolas Sarkozy. Keep that in mind when you hear his criticism. Now, he says that police have really essentially been on high alert for over a year now. They're stretched to their limit because of the state of emergency and the extra security measures that have been put in place since the January attacks last year. This is known as the Plan Vigipirate. You have police officers that are essentially on patrol in areas that they weren't before. So according to him, the police officers are tired, they're overworked. On top of the terrorist threat, we've been having the refugee crisis, and we're pretty soon going to have the Euro Cup that's going to be hosted here in France. And he says a lot of police officers are quite worried about what that's going to mean for police officers. Essentially, it's going to mean more work for them. He says there's one thing in particular that police officers are upset about, and that's the fact that the organizers have set up what's going to be a fan zone right near the Eiffel Tower. It's going to host about 100,000 people right near the Eiffel Tower, which he says is the symbol of France for terrorists. Is this really necessary to organize these kind of mass groupings of people, given the security threat we have? He says it's probably not that necessary after all.
Well, they might feel neglected, but according to a new poll, public opinion is still very favourable to the police.
That's right. Let's take a look at the front page of Le Parisien today. It's a message for the police. Of course, French people still love you. Now, the results of this poll are quite incredible. 91% of French people understand and support the police. Yes, French people love their police. And so this is true. That Charlie spirit I was telling you about really did kind of change public opinion towards police. And according to this poll, there still is that warm feeling towards police. That being said, this kind of love, this kind of attachment has a flip side, according to Le Parisien, and that's that French people expect excellence from their police and self-control. And that's why any kind of police misconduct or police brutality is seen as somewhat of a betrayal.
You mentioned police brutality. Libération is reporting that a certain number of police officers have been caught up caught on camera roughing up yesterday's protesters.
That's right, and protesters in general. Let's take a look at the front page of Libération. You can see, smile, you're being filmed right now. And Libération takes a closer look and says, there's kind of a hypocrisy that we're seeing in the fact that police officers are claiming they're the victims of violence and anti-police hatred, because you just have to look at some of these videos to see that sometimes they're the ones actually being violent with protesters. Dozens of videos have been shared, especially on social media, where you can see some sort of allegations of police brutality. That, for instance, you can see instances where police officers kick protesters that are down, or even punch protesters in the face that are in handcuffs. This is kind of gratuitous police brutality, according to Libération, and it kind of fuels this anti-police feeling that police officers are upset about. Now, Libé says these allegations of police misconduct must be taken very seriously. They must be investigated. If indeed they are true, then they must be sentenced.
Okay, let's end with the French President François Hollande, who's also in the spotlight.
That's right. He's facing more protests against those plans to reform the labor code. Now, yesterday he spoke on the radio and he was very firm about the fact that he is going to push this law. He's not going to back down to the pressure of the street. You can see Les Echos, the business paper, saying that Hollande is being firm with the CGT. That's the leading trade union here in France that's been behind many of the protests against the government reform. Now, the CGT is calling for the reform to be completely scrapped, and it's called for fresh protests today and tomorrow. You can see this is the front page of L'Humanité, the communist paper. It says that opponents aren't letting themselves be intimidated by the government's tough talk. In fact, they say that the socialist government is taking a Thatcher-type turn. They say that François Hollande is acting like Margaret Thatcher. Might be a little bit of extreme analysis there, but you can see this war of words between protesters and the government isn't dying down. And in fact, so you can expect more disruption, more travel disruption today and tomorrow.
It's a country that loves to protest.
It loves to protest, for
Thanks
sure.
very much, Florence, for that spin through the French press this morning.